Back for a second round, we have brand builder, TEDx speaker, culture connoisseur, jive talker, or straight shooter, depending on who you're speaking to. Welcome, Arturo Nunez. Today on the Social Studies Show, we have a great program diving deeper into brand narrative and deciphering the moral compass of intertwining advertising and activism.
So, hey, thank you for having me back. Appreciate that. Always great to be on the show, Social Studies. Hey, I think that brands, more than ever, have an opportunity because of the wide reach of them, via social, digital, and technology, to be really active in the activism space, right? In storytelling that, we talked last time that I was here about listening to your customers, right? And understanding what they care about and what's meaningful to them. And if a brand can find a way to amplify their customer's voice.
And it's great because you get so much feedback through Instagram and social media and like YouTube and that, where they're getting feedback that they can go and actually like help steer that ship.
Yeah,
so,
if they're listening and they call that feedback, they can find unique, authentic gems in there to be able to tell captivating stories and really have social impact. I think last time we were here, we talked about, people using technology and cameras and phones specifically to capture, real life injustice and expose it, right, for broad audiences, absolutely, from their perspective. So that idea of capturing a consumer's perspective and allowing that consumer to amplify their voice is a really important one for a lot of brands today.
So what would you say, or what are some brands that, just stand out in the test of time that are really like touching on the pulse or getting the whole like kind of just like feeling of like what it is as far as like consumer and activism and kind of just like really spreading a broader message in a really good way? Like what are a few brands that you kind of like?
I think, not to beat a dead horse, last time I know we talked a lot about Nike. I think Nike does a great job at being on the pulse of what consumers are thinking about, what matters to consumers. The work that they did with Serena, right, for women's empowerment. The work that they did with Colin Kaepernick, despite some of the controversy we spoke about last time. I think that's really touching on some really hot button issues that really matter to a number of their consumers. So it's important to be on the pulse of that. I think they've done a really nice job at that.
So who would you say is really great in the arena, like maybe say like we were talking about as far as activism, really working on their brand, to say maybe someone like, like Sean King, we were kind of talking about a little bit before, of how he's really done a great job of like putting his brand as a great activist out there for people to engage in through Instagram and kind of like get a thing and actually like kind of bring notice to products or just kind of change the narrative, or like as far as, let's say, gun control or women's rights or like equality in the workforce. Like, so how would you equate his brand narrative?
A lot of polemics and a lot of controversy around Sean, but I think the work that he does is important work. I think he gives a voice to the voiceless. And I think that he has created a brand with a big following, so he can lend that following to people so they can express their points of view. I think it's better when it comes from the individual himself, the stakeholder. It's a much more authentic narrative. So he's been able to kind of shine his magnifying glass on issues of real importance and allow people to speak through his prism of his following. So I think that's powerful. And I think you're going to see a lot more with Sean, with the North Star and the Breakdown
creating
podcast.
His own press.
Right? Absolutely.
So I think that's a really great narrative of owning your own press and being
and it
able to
doesn't
tell your own
seem
story.
to me, I don't know Sean personally,
No, for sure.
but it doesn't seem to me self-serving.
No.
It seems to me like he's trying to bring people together and cultivate a following to address issues that really matter to most people. I think kudos to that.
Yeah, and I think it's really great that, when you look at kind of like the things where he's lending his voice to like Kickstarters for helping people out, like actually, or like doing different foundations, like he was just given an award by Rihanna at the Fashion Week. So it's like looking at how you can actually use that kind of activism in a different way to actually bring about prosperity, as far as like people who have maybe like don't have clean drinking water, or maybe like this person was hurt in this kind of like injustice kind of act, or helping pay this person's hospital bills, something like that. So it's interesting how it has somewhat in a way monetized it, but monetized it in a good way, and using that voice in that way to genuinely help people. Like genuinely, like like people have bills to pay, people have hospital bills, people have I need to get to work, people are hurt, like that kind of deal. So
I think there's people who have found unique ways to utilize their own personal platform to pay it forward. And I always commend people that do that. Last time we talked about LeBron, we talked about LeBron, the basketball player, and the Nike athlete, but LeBron, the guy who runs the school, in Akron, or the guy who partners with Walmart, right, to give people access to school supplies. I mean, that's using your platform to better the lives of people and paying it forward in a way. So I think it's a great example of him, who really, he is a brand, right? I think, what did Jay-Z said? No, I'm not a businessman, I'm a businessman. You know what I mean? LeBron has become a businessman as well, and in doing that has utilized his platform for the betterment of his people.
Well, the thing that I really want to touch about that is actually your whole TED Talk that you talked about of like working with LeBron and actually using that kind of culture and how he's using his brand to bring people about who he is as a person and things that he believes in. And then another person that you had kind of talked to me about in that tech talk was Bryan Stevenson, and how that goes into the social activism as far as like the mass incarceration system, you know, and it kind of touches on kind of like some of the things that Ava DuVernay like talked about in the 13th. You know, what can you kind of lead us in that route of like some of the things that Bryan's doing and how it can actually like kind of talk about some of that account of slavery?
So I'll take a step back for a second and start with the TEDx talk, right? So I got a call from a good friend of mine, Alexis Jones. She said, Arturo, I need your help. I want you to come to Austin, Texas. I'm doing a TEDx event. And I want you to speak. And I was like, all right, cool. You know, I could cobble something together. I was like, what's the subject matter?
I love how you aren't even fazed about just cobbling something together TED Talk. If I had a TED Talk, I'd be so nervous. I can't barely remember my lines for the show.
I've done a few talks, right? So I was like, cool, I'll do that.
All right.
But then here's the clincher. I said, well, what's the subject matter? She's like, it's TEDx Women. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? She's like, yeah, I'm doing TEDx Women in Austin. It's in 2 weeks. Come on down, you'll do a talk. I was like, but what? She was like, figure it out, click. And I was like, whoa. I was like, what is my role in TEDx Women, right? And I was being narrow-minded when I thought about that. And I started thinking about the work that I do. And I started thinking about the power of athletes to change the paradigm on what manhood is. And the example that immediately came to my mind was LeBron James. And I was working with LeBron James at the time. I said, it's often, you know, we narrow cast these people as just athletes. You know, oh, LeBron's just an athlete, he's an amazing athlete. And I thought, well, he's more than that. He's also an amazing husband. And he's an amazing father. And so I did a TED Talk about the power of athletes to be able to change the paradigm of manhood. And I think in our community, there needs to be a significant change in the paradigm of manhood. And I think LeBron is an excellent role model, an example of what manhood could be. And I think oftentimes we see the guy on the court, we see the gladiator on the court, we don't see the amazing father who goes nuts at his kids' game. You see that Instagram video of him and his kids' game going bananas? That's the kind of father that he is.
Still married.
Yeah, still married with a beautiful woman who he takes care of like a queen. Like, that's the kind of story that we need to tell. I think it's a great opportunity to be able to, those guys, to use their platform to show they're greater than athletes. He's doing a great job of doing that. So that's the TEDx. That's how I got to TEDx.
So I do have one quick question about that. It's all good. So what was the female response on that? And what were some of the questions that maybe you got after that whole TEDx talk? Just because of a female perspective, I'm curious, like, what you're talking, the effect.
I think the response was really positive, at least on scene it was, and also I saw in the comments the positive response was pretty positive. I think people were surprised that, like, oh, you're doing a talk at a women's conference, TEDx Women, and you're using sports. That's strange. And you're using LeBron. That's strange. But I think they understood why I was doing that. Because there is
in sports because women are sportswomen?
1,000%. And you know, man, in this whole thing, there's no women without men. We're both part of the same paradigm. So we have to become better people. And I think that we both have responsibilities within that. So I wanted to bring that filter and that perspective to that. Okay. It was amazing. But speaking of TED, and I know you mentioned Bryan Stevenson, who was one of my personal heroes. Okay. I would say
one of my newfound heroes too, because of this guy who turned me on.
Yeah. I would say Bryan Stevenson's TED Talk is probably my favorite of all time. Okay. Maybe my favorite talk of all time. Never mind TED Talk.
That's big steps.
It's a big step, and the reason why is twofold. Okay. One, because I do a lot of public speaking. I'm a student of public speaking, and I thought that his talk was a master class on public speaking, because the first thing he did was engage you as a human being. He told a story about his grandmother. Who doesn't have a grandmother? Who doesn't have stories of being a child and connecting with their grandmother? Like, he told that story first to hook you. To hook you, and then he said, okay, I got your attention. You realize that I'm a human just like you? Well, here's what I really am concerned with right now. I'm concerned with this idea of mass incarceration and mass dehumanization of people, people of color. And then he launched into that. So you were open and receptive to that because you already accepted Bryan as a human being just like you, who had a grandma just like yours, who had honest, authentic thoughts about his relationship with his grandmother and how it impacted his life. And then he went on to tell the story of the mass incarcerated American. I think it was brilliant. And then obviously there are many facts and statistics in his talk that really astound many people. He drew many parallels to situations that have happened in the past, including the Holocaust in Germany, that really brought the point home about the horror that is mass incarceration today. And kudos to Bryan for trying to put an end to that. He's doing so many things. But Equal Justice Initiative is incredible in the work that they're doing.
Well, mass incarceration is a big business these days. It's like basically kind of like, in a somewhat way, replace slavery.
Yeah.
It's like it's basically like cheap labor for people who may or may not be fully deserving of the time the crimes.
Yeah.
And
the 13th Amendment says it's legal. The 13th Amendment says it's legal. And it's interesting. I think all of these subjects, the more you find out, the more you learn about them.
And so you're talking about this article in the New York Times.
Yes, the more outraged you are and the more inspired you are to take action.
Okay.
I think a great example, in addition to Bryan Stevenson's TED Talk, is this whole 1619 project by the New York Times, which set out to document the first recorded arrival of slaves or the enslaved in America in 1619, and then set out to, by brilliant journalism and brilliant writing, document all of the ways in which slavery has impacted our current society. Things like there was no public education system before one was created for former enslaved people. There was no Medicare system until one system was created for former enslaved people. And all these things weren't created out of the beneficence of people's willingness. They were created through the struggle of black people to have this country stand for what its creed is. Right?
Declaration of Independence.
The Declaration of we hold these truths to be self-evident. And sometimes what is supposed to be self-evident isn't evident at all.
So we had some false advertising is what we're talking about. We're bringing it back to
of the worst type.
Worst type of false advertising. So
I think it's powerful. The New York Times 1619 project, if you get a chance to take a look at it. It's a magazine, it's also a podcast. Really powerfully brings the story of slavery to life in America, not from a historical perspective, or not just from a historical perspective, but how those stories still have ramifications today in our society. Powerful stuff.
Okay. So we're talking about talking the talk and walking the walk. And so we talk about like these brands and these collabs, and they're talking about activism and kind of like bringing it back to culture. And like, it's like, okay, so are these Supreme collabs, are they bringing money back to the artists? And are they like expanding like the culture in these different cities and so on and so forth? Which sometimes I drive by Supreme in Hollywood and like that, and it's, a bunch of Asian kids with a lot of money buying stuff in the lines, and I'm like kind of wonder, is it doing stuff? Is it bringing stuff? Is it making people interested? Is it asking the right questions? I look at things like things I used to listen to, brands like Public Enemy, like where like, you look at it and like, like basically
bringing black
like,
consciousness back.
Black consciousness back, but then also like being a thing of like, like there are people like, it's like of the culture and showing that of like, people had pendants of Africa and like Africa shaved in their head and kind of like, dashikis and kind of thing. And like that all kind of translates down into advertising and showing that in commercialism, which, it's like, there is these parallels of like, having activism and having it be profitability because you're trying to get the message out. And so I look at that and I wonder, it's like I think like they go hand in hand.
Yeah.
They go hand in hand. And it's like one of those things where like I was talking to a friend of mine and he was up in arms about Jay-Z's deal with the NFL. And I was like, let's take a step back from that for a second, like let's actually take a step back before we actually know the whole deal. And like, let's give Jay a little benefit of the doubt. And like, you can make your own mind or whatever. But sometimes to learn how to like run something, you have to get in there and watch and see how things are done. And so the whole thing about it is like, he's like, yeah, but he's profiting off the culture. He's profiting off the culture. And I was just like, well, maybe that be, but like at the same time, no black person, no minority has ever owned an NFL. I mean, I guess, what's that one guy who owns the Jaguars? I can't remember his name. There's an Indian fellow, and I can't think of the name, but it'll come to me. But anyway, you have to see how things are run sometimes before you can come in and like make a difference. And then also the whole thing about it is sometimes when you're selling things, the profitability, they're actually going to the message. And I was like talking to him, and I was asking him, have you read Malcolm X's autobiography? And he was like, yeah. And I'm like, did you buy it? And he was like, yeah. And I'm like, where do you think that money went? And I was like, someone profited from selling of that book, and it's still getting the message out there. So perhaps if Jay is actually doing this thing with his brand and getting in the NFL, maybe he's learning, and maybe someone will actually like reap the rewards later on down the road. Because with the Malcolm X book, you know, like his family is still getting rewarded, his foundation is getting rewarded. People are still learning about his story and his journey. And so sometimes you have to like take a step back and look at the big picture to take a step forward. And so I think like that, and like kind of what was really unique is like you're talking about how you're launching these two new brands.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's really beautiful to see like after this experience with Nike and with Apple and Louis Vuitton, you've taken a step back and then you've launched this new like coffee brand. Yeah. You're launching this new snack bar brand. Yeah. And like, why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I'll start by saying, I don't think that, for-profit and activism have to be antithetical. I don't think so. Okay. I think there are companies that have a moral compass that want to do the right thing by consumers. And I think there's, it's not necessarily a trade-off between doing the right thing for consumers and making a profit. It doesn't have to be. There can be, it doesn't have to be. So when you talk about, Supreme, the next Nike guy is the CMO of Supreme. And if he's anything like the marketers that I knew at Nike who actually are listening to customers and listening to the culture, then I'm sure that what he's doing with those collabs is beneficial to both artist and brand, right? So there's a way to do that authentically and originally. I think what Jay-Z is doing, I think, there's a lot of controversy around it right now. I think the remains to be seen what happens long term with that. I think there's, I agree with your school of thought that you being on the inside, you can affect change. And maybe he can, make the NBA more accountable, the NFL more accountable to its consumers and its athletes. That's at the end of the day what we're talking about. And maybe they could do that while making a profit. I'm assuming that they're planning on doing it that way.
Oh, but JD doesn't like lose money.
Exactly. So maybe he's bringing some consciousness to it. However, people say, well, they were trying to gentrify Brooklyn and these people came in from outside the community and they used Jay-Z as a spearhead to gentrify Brooklyn. And the stadium got built and the neighborhood got gentrified and Jay-Z got 1/4 of 1% of the nets, and then he sold that, and at the end of the day, the people that were interested in gentrifying the neighborhood got what they wanted. So people are hoping that it's not a repeat of that, right? And I'm sure there was some benefit. I don't know the whole story. I'm sure there was some benefit to what happened with Jay-Z or Jay-Z being a co-owner. I know certainly I was there the second night of the concert, so it was amazing. But beyond that, hopefully it was a benefit for the neighborhood. The neighborhood did indeed get gentrified, right? So I worry about that.
So here's the thing of like living in Brooklyn at a time. Was that gentrification not going to happen? Because, it was sure moving fast when I was living there.
Yeah.
Is that inevitability? And so...
But just because something's going to happen doesn't mean you should take part in it if it's negative.
No, for sure. And again, I'm playing devil's advocate. I don't know the thing, but I'm just saying, if you look at Williamsburg, Bed-Stuy, Bushwick, the gentrification is moving.
Yeah.
And so looking at that and being a part of that, whether it is on any part of that business like that, as a minority, should you just sidestep that or should you get involved in some way, shape, or form?
Be in the game, yeah, sure. It's a challenge, depending on how. So you asked me about my personal stuff. So I think I'm in two particular situations now, and I do consulting for a lot of brands, but I'm in two particular situations right now where I'm an equity stake owner. So I'm owner of two brands. One is called Taste Bars, it's a snack product, and the other one's called Yainya, it's a coffee brand from Ethiopia. And just to talk about that cross-rough of profit making and social impact, Yainya is a farm-to-cup, black-owned company. So Africans harvest, roast the coffee, package the coffee, ship the coffee to America. African Americans get the coffee and sell it to African American retailers of coffee products. And we're telling that story and we're helping the people who are actually harvesting this product. And it's a completely black-owned company. I'm very proud to say that. And I'm an owner of the company, a significant stake in the company.
Where do I get it? How do I become a stakeholder?
Come on,
I can shoot some photos, man.
On.
I can do this. I can do
Absolutely,
this.
yo, I might need you. Hey, you want to go shoot Ethiopia? We can make that happen.
Of course.
So that's number one. And the other one, where I'm also a significant stakeholder, is taste bars. And that the action there is, the country is suffering from diabetes. Diabetes is up 30% year over year. And many of the products that we eat today are laden with sugar, not just the soft drinks, but edible products laden with sugar. And we have a great tasting line of snack products that are not laden with sugar, zero added sugars. They're low carb, they're delicious. And we hope to be able to turn people onto these snack products. Affordable, yes.
Okay, because
yes.
I mean, like,
at a reasonable price point.
Okay, because I wonder, sometimes it's like the whole, like, let's go to Whole Foods and like that. I'm just like, there's just people who can't afford that.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. No.
So it's just
we're at a reasonable price point. We thought about that. We just want to fight diabetes, sugar addiction, and we think we have a great. And by the way, we don't think that you have to sacrifice taste in order to get something that's healthy and good for you. So we have a product that does both. That tastes great and is actually good for you.
Okay, so you really are not just walking the walk, you are talking the talk
I'm
with
trying,
the path
little
of
by
kind of
little.
like showing people ways that they can do and be like active within the community and actually like have a great profitability and
And I challenge all the brands that I consult for to do the same.
Okay.
I'm fortunate to be in a situation that I'm in today where I only take on projects that I'm passionate about with brands that get it and want to do some positive and good in the community.
So I have a question from that.
Yeah.
Has there ever been a brand who didn't take on that path that you had to either like leave or you had to do some like, I'd say, objective criticism and maybe didn't go over as well?
Yeah, I've had numerous examples where people either didn't get it or got it but didn't want to bother, even if it would make them money. Like imagine approaching a brand and saying to them, hey, if you just target this consumer segment, and this is the way that you would do that by being more inclusive in your diversity practices, your hiring practices, et cetera, or in your communications, you could create a bigger audience. There are some brands that will accept that challenge and say, okay, I want to do that. And I think it's the right thing to do. And some brands that go, you know what, that's too foreign for me. If that requires me to deal with people that I'm not used to dealing with or used to talking to, I'll forego the money. I'm good. I'll continue to do business the way that I do business. And so those kind of brands I don't deal with. The brands that get it and actually want to be reflective of their consumer base and be diverse, those are the kind of brands that I welcome the work for.
Well, get it right here, AIE Creative, if you want
Come
to
and
actually
get it, what?
No, I really appreciate the insight, and I think that's great work, and it's cool to hear about all the different stuff you're doing and actually having that kind of mindset as a creative of what kind of things you're looking for. So again, Arturo, really
Stan,
appreciate
thank you, brother. Appreciate being on the show anytime. Love you guys.
Okay.
You guys do a great job. I love what you're doing and the effort that you share to share the knowledge with the people. So
Thanks,
amazing.
Man. Appreciate it.
Anytime.
Socialstudiesshow.com. Check it out.
Boom.
Thank you for joining us. You got an opinion? We'd love to hear it. Leave a comment down below. Subscribe to the Social Studies Show on our YouTube channel.